Hello. Oh, look at that, it lit up. Yeah, for a long time I believed, well, I've never done anything except art, so I've only been an artist 50 years. But I believed that the price of a work of art represented part of that person's life, whatever money they made, because the art represents part of the artist's life, and there's a balance there. And so if they're very rich, they would pay a higher price because they would keep the balance as to who's looking at their art. But now that seems impossible because you can have 4 people buying one work of art and paying $200 million for it. The showing anecdote I have for that is there's 4 women that pooled their money and bought a Basquiat from Sotheby's, and they were at our barbecue at our house telling everybody about it. They didn't even unwrap it. They said it was too gruesome to look at. Nobody could look at it. They just put it in the safe and storage, and Sotheby's lent them the money to buy it, and then they would profit later when they sold it. And Valerie heard this story and my wife went over to them and said, it's a really interesting story you're telling about the purchase of a work of art, but it might work better if you told it somewhere else. And they got the message and laughed. Yeah. Because even though the amounts of money don't seem to match with my formula, it's still a gesture on the audience as to what they think of the art. I believe. I'm sure there are still people who are buying art only trying to make money on it and put it in the vault. So my question is the ultimate goal of an artist to end up with his work as fiduciaries in some vault? Used to be you ended up in the museum and then everybody could see it. But now they're just a fiduciary making money.
Well, my first father-in-law said the proper price for something is the maximum number that the market can bear. And I'm afraid he was right. In other words, if the market will pay it, then that's what the price should be. So I don't know if that should be true, but it seems to be the case.
I thought we were introducing ourselves, but it sounds like we're just jumping in. We'll all be mysterious.
No, yes.
Tery, if you could introduce yourself, then Guy, Doug.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I've done nothing but make art for 50 years, and we had a gallery in Soho for 10 years. I'm not sure why we did that, but it was a good ride. And the proof of that is that a lot of the artists are still our friends. But we bit the bullet there when with 9/11 we had to close. But we set the prices in the gallery according to the need for the price. You know, some things are very expensive to make, and so that's included. And other collectors need tax deductions. So all that figured into setting the price and what they had sold before, because we felt that the gallery should protect the market that the artist has, and not, I can count very few, but prices going down. I don't.
I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Guy Nouri. I'm a friend of Tery's. I've been around almost as long as he has in most of the same places. It's nice to be here. God knows the value of art is still a mystery. I enjoy Tery's optimism and idealism. I'm not sure that that's going to take place in this century, but we'll see. So why don't we keep going? Who's next?
Doug Shear, Chairman Emeritus of Artist Talk on Art, one of the original founders in 1974, and an artist, and active with Birdcliff on a number of committees there, and with the Dorsky Museum. There are a lot of things I'll talk about during the course of this session, but the thing I would lead off with saying is, after having worked with something like 8,500 artists in the 48 years of ATOA, I believe that we have a great deal of stratification in the market. We have a very tiny number of people selling things at extraordinary prices. Most of them, I would not say all of them, I'm sure I'd be criticized if I said all of them, but many of them are very privileged. They came from privilege. They're well connected, and they're selling essentially to other people of privilege. So it's a kind of, as you might say, it's this sort of farm system with stratification in it, and a very, very small number, 1 or 2%, are making big dollars out of art, supported through the auction houses, et cetera, and the big galleries and certain museums. And the rest are, the average artist is making something like $50,000 a year, not necessarily all from his or her art. So, but through freelance work, through other kinds of occupations, teaching art school, and yet the market hovers around $60 billion worldwide. So it has peaks and valleys. It was down in 2008 and 9, then it popped back up. Likewise, it was down in 2020, 2021. Now it's popping up again. But when we try to consider what it's worth, what the value of something is worth, we have to consider the structure of the market that is completely disconnected from the average artist. And there are 1.4 million artists, working artists in the world. The vast majority of them can't get arrested. So that's what's real for me. That's what I believe is real. And the rest of it we can talk about, we'll exchange with each other tonight. That's my opening volley.
Okay.
Cheryl?
I'm Cheryl Safren. I'm an artist, and this is and as you see, I'm not that young, and this is the first year that I fall in between what Doug just said. This is the first year I can actually support myself from my art. The art itself, without the teaching or the commercial art or all thing. So it took me a very long time, and mostly what it is now I do a number of public art commissions in different parts of the country. So.
Okay, so Tery, you want to start the discussion here?
Yeah, the thing I've noticed, and I don't know how this plays into the formula of the economics of the art world, but I'm meeting a lot of collectors who I didn't know, strangers, who've done their homework. They have talked to consultants who are advisors in the art world. and help them shop for the art they want. I have a couple of collectors who have put little drawings or life-size drawings of my paintings on the wall and pretended they were there for a month, and 3D rendering with the computer to show the art in their homes. They're all doing this, and it seems that there's at least I'm seeing an emergence of a new kind of collector, someone who's quite serious and willing to spend time and money to make sure that they're getting what they're looking for.
You're saying that they're also doing virtual collections where they may not even have the art in the first place. They just display it virtually in their virtual home online.
No, I haven't met that kind of collector. My collectors are, I mean this in the best way, are like children, the innocent eye.
Mhm.
They see the art, they respond to the art, and they want to keep that feeling, and they want the art to be part of that and become part of their lives. That's extraordinary, I think.
I wonder how long that's going to last. I went to Mass MoCA. They had a silhouette there. The silhouette was there. It was painted or drawn by professional artisans. Silhouette was gone. It was all done by contract. I don't remember the length of the contract. The drawing was up according to specifications for a certain amount of time, and then it came down, and the rights were being held by a legal firm that knew how to license it out to other museums, so on and so forth. So the art only existed as a result of contract. It didn't exist in any other solid form. It existed during the exhibition as a painted work, and then after the exhibition was over, it was destroyed or taken away, but it only existed as a result of a contract. And I wasn't disheartened. I just thought it was unusual. But now with what's happening with NFTs, I call them affectionately nifties, that you don't really need to have an object. And considering that objects require personnel to move them around, trucks to ship them. I tried to take some paintings out to Santa Fe. It was going to cost me in the neighborhood of $5,000 or $6,000 if I did it myself to take the works out to Santa Fe. And then if I were to do it with a professional art mover, it would have taken 3 months and considerably more money. So I think virtual art stands a great chance of taking over. Especially as resolution increases. You'll be able to walk in someplace, and you'll see this enormous exhibit, and it will be electronic. And you might think that's a silly idea, but I think right now there's a Monet exhibit, the water lilies are being displayed in places other than in Paris, and they're virtual. And as the observer, you can pinch or zoom the Monet, so you can walk around in essentially the electronic orangerie, except you're in Cincinnati or Miami or wherever they have the equipment to display the images like that. I like that I saw Van Gogh that way in Chicago. It was a magnificent show, but it was weird for me to be able to go up to a Van Gogh, see the original, and then right next to it was a digital version that I could play with. I was wondering what Van Gogh's reaction would be. I think he probably would have smashed all the screens, frankly. But I think it's changing, and I think the need for a physical object. I think right now we still have an emotional connection to the object, good, bad, or indifferent. We have an emotional connection to the physical object. I think that connection is dissipating. So I'm kind of curious what's going to happen. Yes.
I think I wouldn't write off the connection to physical objects too quickly. I think that, if you go back to the 1960s when museums like the Metropolitan and others started putting on these mega shows, sort of like, Alan Shoner, who ended his days in Hudson, was the person responsible for something called Harlem on My Mind. But
Right.
he also did a number. He did about 5 or 6 other mega shows. It kicked off this era that we're still in, where the museum has become theater. It's become an event. And
Right.
the things you're describing, the Van Gogh exhibit, et cetera, are immersive experiences. They're really like theater, though.
It's theater.
So it's a step away from the object itself and the, spending time with the object. And in fact, certainly most young people, maybe all people, if you watch them at museums, they're on their phone the entire time.
Right.
They're running through the museum. They're not spending time. They're literally detached from the art. And so in some senses, for that generation at least, they don't get it.
Yeah. I think we're not disagreeing. In fact, I'll go one step further. I think that the actual object, the physical object, I mean, consider how many people there are in the world, okay? Billions, right? I was told there would be never more than 600 million people on the planet. Well, we blew through that number a long time ago. So now everybody can be serviced by digital art. Okay, you can get digital art on your phone, you can get digital art on your TV, any TV. You can get it in public spaces, you can get it in your restaurant, in your hotel room.
Mhm.
I think actually there is going to be sort of a need for, I want the actual original,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, digital art, from my perspective, and I think there are wonderful things about digital art, but on a very basic level, it's cheapening the art experience. So if we talk about what is it worth, digital art, to me, at least the experience of art through digital only, as opposed to being with the object, is, and certainly when it comes to sculpture, I don't know how you can appreciate something unless that's sculptural, unless you can be in its presence. Certainly not the same experience at all. And so the things that since this is our subject tonight, which is what's it worth and what creates these massive prices or these incredibly high prices, it is the uniqueness of that object.
There is, I agree, there's something about the uniqueness of the object. Also, I think there's something going back to cave times. There's, basically the art object is a fetish. I mean, on an archaeology basis, it's a fetish. You can hold it, you can see it, you can take it with you, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The digital stuff does not have that presence. You can't hold it, so to speak. But you do have this thing, so you're holding an image of the relic. Okay, you don't have the relic itself, but you have the picture of the relic, and that is competing with the experience of the relic. And I think, yes, the people with real money are going to want a real piece of the cross, or a piece of the real cross, or however that goes.
Right.
And the Mona Lisa, somebody's going to want to keep the Mona Lisa in a vault or in a carefully protected public space, because it controls the flow and therefore the money at the Louvre. And but I'm wondering, yes, I have great sentimental attachment to paint and other materials. And as an artist, I don't want to give that up. But at the same time, being a realist and somebody who's been in the digital business for decades, I've seen how things have changed. I remember going inside of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I said, I've got some images for you. Let me show you. And I had my computer with me, and they said, no, we only accept slides, Kodachrome slides.
Uh-huh.
Well, if you were to show up these days with a book of Kodachrome slides, you'd be laughed out of any place that you went to.
Right.
They want to see your website and they want to see your JPEGs, so to speak.
Right.
and they don't know the difference between a JPEG, a TIFF, and a. But it doesn't matter. It's because it's the new language. So I think the pricing is kind of a comedy, and it's sort of a handy thing for people who are moving money around. But I don't see any. Again, it's hard to connect the real value with the quality of the art itself. It's not like Raphael and 10 assistants, doing some paintings in Venice or whatever. Everything's gone digital.
I'd like to, so I personally think that now my art is very low tech, okay? So, but for how many years have we heard that painting is dead, okay? But painting isn't dead, okay? So it died and it came back how many times? So
3 or 4.
the thing is that I do think that the future, I mean, not that I have a crystal ball, but I do think that in the future, there'll definitely be more virtual and there'll be more augmented art, because in where I work mostly in the public art realm, they, like just in the gallery world where there are things that go in and out of fashion. Now, like the word is interactive.
Right.
And if you think about it, as someone who taught for many years, kids have a less and less of an attention span because they're always on their screens.
Right.
So all these places, they want things where the audience could actually participate in the art, and that way they feel that they're part of the art, and there is some relevance to that. I personally, the thing that and of course, like everyone who's alive in 2022, I also have to deal with some aspects in digital, but I personally cannot abide by the flatness. I mean, I need texture. If something doesn't have texture, I'm not.
You don't like feeling a TV screen? You don't like glass?
That it doesn't do anything for me. No, I need the texture.
Yeah. Well, then the price of art seems to be closely related to texture in that case.
For me, yes.
Yeah.
The joke was, why did the art student use whiteout on the screen of their TV, of their computer?
What was the answer?
She couldn't find an eraser.
Uh-huh. Yeah. No, I thought she was gessoing the surface,
We're at a tour at the Brooklyn Museum, which has probably the best in the world for conservation of art, because their collection is enormous. There's more in the Brooklyn Museum than there is in the Met. Anyway, and there's an Ad Reinhardt laying on a table that's like 10 feet long, and somebody put a brick through it and destroyed the top half of the painting. And it's all about subtle colors and things.
It's 7 o'clock.
And I turned to the head conservator and said, "What are you doing with this painting? It's dead. I mean, it's gone. There's no conservation here. There's a point where you just can't do that." And she said, "Oh no, when we're done conserving this painting, we will get very close to what the artist intended."
How does she know?
Well, I've spent a lot of my life in digital, and a lot of my time, messing up my studio. And I prefer messing up my studio a lot because, every time I go back to my computers, there are 2 or 3, I was at one point, probably the 5th most knowledgeable person in New York City on Photoshop. Those days are so far gone, I can't even tell you. I don't even want to use Photoshop. Okay. I like the idea of Tery and I were talking previously about finger painting. It'd be fun to do what we're doing right now and have, 6 or 10 or 20 people finger painting at the same time. It might be very interesting. But touch I think is very important. And I don't know. The money thing is interesting. I don't get it. I think, there's certain artists that like to paint for people or paint for a subject or paint to give it away, or, the kings. I mean, there's a lot of, when you look back at the history of art, there are a lot of kings in that history. A few queens, but mostly kings, emperors, so on and so forth. I mean, Henry sent Van Eyck to Europe to paint all the princesses so he could see who he wanted to marry next. Okay. And then the painter would come back with portraits of the princesses in Europe, and then he would decide who he was going to marry next based on those portraits.
Mhm.
I'm sure he paid a fortune for those portraits, but he didn't have to travel. So there's a certain amount of convenience involved in the money aspect, a lot of money and a lot of convenience. And I think, where money is involved, digital is no obstacle. I mean, if you can have a virtual reality or AR or VR version of a Richard Serra in your holodeck on your spaceship, that's a hell of a lot less mass to move around than a 2-inch thick piece of steel that's 10 feet high. So, the future for Richard Serra is definitely going to be digital, whether he likes it or not, because nobody's going to put one of those pieces on a spaceship. So sorry, Richard, think about that.
Well, if you had one fall on your toe, you would know.
Danielle, can we get your opinion, being the youngest panelist here?
Sure. Thank you for that. I liked what Tery said about a painting being dead and what Cheryl said about the texture of art being so important, because remember I was reading an article yesterday about NFTs, and I realized one of the most important things about art to me is that it can exist without being observed. And once you put it in a computer where you can't access it unless you're directly observing it, it just becomes something that you hoard, that rich people can hoard, like private property or like stocks. And it just becomes this, like, just yet another thing that late stage capitalism has given us that completely halts all productivity that has something real that can be shown for itself. It becomes just wealth hoarding and status showing, and it completely takes away the community aspect of making art, which is being
Could you say that again? You said something about you like the fact that art is something that you could have privately and it didn't have to be seen by everybody. You said you like that?
No, I liked that art that you can have that's tangible can
Right.
exist without being actively observed. Once you click your
That's a
NFT,
beautiful idea. That's a
Thank
beautiful
you.
idea. The art can exist without being in the woods. Right. It's very nice. Art exists without having a price tag on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thinking these days is all art must have a price tag, and that's an unfortunate thought. It didn't help Van Gogh at all.
The other poker, the stick you poke the gorilla with,
Yeah.
is when you see the art later, is it the same piece? Has it changed? Has something happened to it? And you know damn well it has. No matter what it is, no matter what it's made out of, it's going to change. And I'm betting that the future is with people who enjoy that. They like to see that life in the piece and the things happening to it. And the conservators can, they can have lunch at MoMA. I mentioned the conservators because they did save the Guernica when Tony Cipresi tried to kill it. So the conservators were very useful.
Yeah, they have a role, certainly. But
He spray painted the Guernica, one of the most important anti-protest work of art in the universe. And they were on it in 2 minutes because they came out of the cafeteria with guns blaring to clean it.
So I have a thought about technology, which I think applies to the art world, which is somewhere on this planet, maybe multiple places on this planet, there are still steam locomotives pulling trains. And there are still, you know, very old-fashioned printing presses. There are just old-fashioned things that coexist with the latest in technology. And in the same way, in our art world, the world we call our art world, every conceivable kind of art, from Native American art, you know, art in the Americas being made by descendants of Mayans, and art in obscure areas of Asia that are completely disconnected from the art market, but are very valid as objects, and may have little or no pricing involved in them at all, nothing to speak of. So we live in the reality, at least I live in the reality, that we are surrounded on the planet by a beautiful array of different kinds of art being made by different people, different peoples, for different reasons, and being shared in different ways, sometimes religious ways or spiritual ways, but having nothing to do with the marketplace. And then, yeah, go ahead.
I'm smelling another topic that feels like fairness. The Aboriginals in Australia are making these magnificent paintings today in Northern Australia, and they sit down with a couple of pots of paint and some sticks that they use for brushes, and they make these, I mean, you've got to see them to believe them, how magnificent they are. And of course, now that we've got enough video on the internet, you can watch anything almost. And you can watch somebody paint a painting for 3 hours, and it's quite fascinating. Now, at the end of their painting, the object, and it dries, it is sold to a reseller of some kind. Now they get their $200 or $300 for their 2 days work. And then that piece is sold in Europe or in the West, wherever, for many thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. When I looked to see if I could acquire one, because they were so beautiful, I think the minimum price was in the 10 or 15,000 zone for a small one. And these people are making them. So that's not fair. And it's not fair because they should have that money, but it's also not fair because to get there and to pass that tradition on, you need to have the resources to do that. I know Tery and I probably struggled in the 70s. I hope you struggled a little bit in the 70s. But you know, if you didn't play the game and be part of that, you didn't get access to certain areas in the art world, and that's unfortunate. You should be, you know, without being Basquiat, who happened to run into Warhol. You know, there should be more distribution of artistic wealth, not just the money, but there should be more access. And if all the money is concentrated in corners, it doesn't sort of it doesn't fill the field with all the wildlife that needs to be there.
That's what happened. MIT did a book 2 years ago. I had nothing to do with the writing of the book. But there's one, we got them here, about one work of art I did. And I don't want to go into what it's all about, but it was about the social aspects of the art world. And the art mafia, whatever you want to call them, the people who control the power, got pissed. And I never noticed it, but MIT did. And I was marginalized and kept from doing certain things and keep me on the fringe of what was going on. And they were very clever at it. And MIT said that's wrong. We got to correct history. So there are people out there looking out for, I think, for artists that are inventive and creative and don't put money at the top of the list. And I'm betting that they're going to win out in the historical sense.
In a couple 100 years.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
faster than that because everything's moving so fast. Anyway, and that's great.
I don't think, that's a very optimistic view. I don't think that they're going to win out because I think that that's one of the lack of access, and as most artists, I would say the majority of artists, lack of access, except for that small percentage that Doug mentioned.
Yeah.
is one of the reasons that I went to public art, because the gallery system is beside being very commercial, it's decided by whoever owns the gallery. So it's a commercial endeavor. It's all based on sales, and they may buy an artist's work when they're young, and they buy a lot of it, and which makes the price go up, and then they get richer, etc. So one of the things that I liked about public art, which is because the whole market system is totally different. The artists are never chosen based on price, because there is a budget. It's printed when it goes out, when they're looking for now, many states have either 0.5% to 2% of whatever the structure they're putting up goes to art. Now that could be for fountains or monuments. It could be for when you walk into the lobby. These are all state buildings. So many states, I mean, I've done this for a lot of states all over the United States. What it is there'll be, you present, if you're chosen as a finalist, then you make a maquette, which is a miniature of what you propose, and you do a presentation. The smallest jury was 9 people. It's between 9 and 12 people. So it's not like one gallery person who is yay or nay and has a commercial thing. There is no, if there are 4 artists who are finalists, one is not going to get the job because they're saying they're going to undercut another artist, or they're going to be charging more or less. The budget is the budget. If you can't do it for that budget, you don't compete. So it's not a monetary thing. It's based on what you're proposing. And that is decided from between 9 to 12 people. Who are these 9 to 12 people? Okay, so I'm going to tell you, even my last thing was for the state of Montana. So that 3 times I competed in Montana, and each time the state had a totally different juror. There'll be the architect who designed the buildings. There'll be people who are using the building. There'll be somebody from the chairman of the art department. There'll be somebody from the local museum. They always take somebody from the public. So it's, I think it's a much fairer way to do that. And it also says more about the artist's thing, because it's not just one guy who's trying to get rich, who owns a gallery, making a decision on how much something is worth. This is, different. Well, I think you get the idea.
So,
Are you saying that this seems to work? The public art seems to work as a mediator for
it's
art?
Because they couldn't care less about, some of the decisions that gallery directors make. It's not the same. They have a totally different thing. Their goal is not a commercial goal. Their goal is to put something up that these are permanent, and they want it to look good because it represents their university or their court or whatever's put up by the state. Yeah.
I think though that public art, and I should mention that Artist Talk on Art, the very first panel, January of 1975, was called Whatever Happened to Public Art. Already public art was highly politicized in those days and controversial, and
So what happened?
Well, we've had that subject multiple times, because public art is still very much, it weaves in and out of the art world in its importance. it really is, to my perspective, you know, after all these years, it is a kind of outlier. It's very important. It is rather democratic by its nature, just the way NEA, for example, has committees for all the different categories, state council and so forth.
When I
But-
came to New York in 1968,
Yeah,
Doris Friedman was just starting her program for public art.
well, you mean
And,
city wall? City wall.
Her paradigm, her template was slightly different than yours, and that the experts picked the artists who were candidate to put up their art.
Right.
And then it went to the public. And the
So,
public-
you know, New York, I'm not even on the list in New York State. I never competed in New York State. So some of these things that your impression, I think, is because I think New York, it's funny because the art world is in New York, yet New York has a very poor public art program, I have to tell you. Compared to other states, it's not,
Well,
yeah,
I take a little umbrage with that. I would say
Yeah.
that the one really outstanding public art entity is the MTA.
no, that's true. Yes,
The
I
MTA has a
agree.
wonderful program,
You're right.
and it's very democratic, and it
Yes.
gives an opportunity to many artists.
Yes, you're
And they've
right.
been doing that.
And they
for,
have
I don't know,
great stuff in
25
it
years.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Uh-huh.
Other than that, it's a little, but you are correct. I agree. Yeah.
So I wanted to share with you some things I looked up in preparation for tonight. On ArtNet, I found a survey that had been done by something called the Creative Independent. Not familiar with them, but in any event, came through ArtNet. In the USA, 19% of artists make more than $50,000 a year. You know, from multiple sources.
Oh,
So 19% make over $50,000 a year from multiple sources. 61% of all artists do freelance work to support themselves. 42% have other jobs, you know, working in a frame shop, you know, working in a museum, whatever, they're teaching, other jobs. 12%, only 12%, count gallery sales as a primary income source. And it doesn't mean it's their entire income, but a primary source. It might mean, you know, a major source, 20, 25, 50%, whatever. 29%, and this goes to my opinion about what really runs the art world, 29% count on inheritance or family support.
Hmm.
Okay, so again, what I say is, for all the MFAs, for all, you know, for all that art school infrastructure that we have, that people, you know, throw themselves like lemmings at, the stark reality is that approximately a third of everybody that's out there making art is doing it either because they have, you know, money coming from an inheritance, or they have perhaps a wealthy spouse or whatever. They have the ability to do it, you know, that's one of the operative realities.
I got a story about Saul LeWitt. He was
That was my story.
no, it's about your story.
There's no fear of stealing stories.
He didn't want anybody profiting on his art. He wanted that to stop. So Duane Gallery got all the artists in the group, hired a lawyer, Seth Siegelow. He wrote a 30-page contract that said you could never sell the work of art for more than $100. And that's how you bought it. If you were there to buy it, you got it for $100, and it stayed that forever. 15 years later, we're at Sotheby's with Saul, and he was a big collector. He was involved with the collecting of art. And his paper piece comes up for auction. And the auctioneer says it's $100, first $100 get it. There's no increase on the price. You got it, it's yours, it's $100. And I thought, well, that worked beautifully. And then the auctioneer says, now we have the contract that says you can't sell it for more than $100. Do I hear $10,000 for the contract?
Beautiful.
And they sold it like for 50 grand, and Saul pissed. He was collectors will know how to make money on your art if they really want to. And our job is to get them to trigger that for us. Whatever that.
Well, the nice thing about the NFTs, if they're done properly, is the NFT has a percentage that can be set at the start, where however many times that item is sold or resold, a percentage goes back to the originator, aka the artist, so that the first time the artist sells it, the artist can actually sell the work for $50 or $100, and he might only get we'll give that $50. Next time it's sold for $500, but he then gets, say, 10% of that on an ongoing basis. He makes just as much money. Then sold for $10,000, he's getting $1,000, and it keeps going. Now that kind of thing begins to make sense because
No.
well, it does if it allows you to have money and the freedom to keep making new art.
And what happens if the collector refuses to pay it?
Sorry, say again.
To complete the sentence, turn the page.
Yeah,
If the collector refuses to pay it, I'm not going to sue him.
you're stuck on it.
I'm not going to stick the government on him. I'm
No.
going to have him over for dinner. He's a friend, and he got the prices up on my art. And I'm not interested in that 5% or whatever. They tried it in California, and all the art that was sold during that time period was sold in Nevada. They just wouldn't participate with the government deciding, and that's ultimately who's going to decide, because you're now in a position to sue them. And I'm not going to sue a collector. That's
No, you need collectors.
suicide.
Yeah,
No, and Ted Kennedy tried to pass a bill like that. And when I made this speech in his face, he said, "We never looked at the system from the viewpoint of an artist like you," meaning that I'm not participating in the ordinary economy of the art world, but I'm never going to sue a collector. That's just bizarre.
well, in the Renaissance, it was similar. I mean, it was the collectors were all the church, and all the art that got commissioned was by the church. And it wasn't because you painted a better Jesus or a prettier Mary. It's because they chose you to attract people to come into the church, and you didn't mess with your client, which was the church. If you did, you were at. And then with the Renaissance came, a little bit more. The merchants had enough money to have portraits made, and then your clientele was no longer just the church; it was also the merchants, and that's where we are today. We're genuflecting to the merchants. We're usually in hedge funds and things like that.
Hedge fund managers are the merchant princes of today.
Right, and we still genuflect, okay? And I'm just going, this is insane. But at the same time, I think we have to keep being inventive and invent art forms that are, beyond that. It's hard to imagine one that's beyond, that can transcend the system.
You can't, it's impossible to transcend the system, because anything that throws off any kind of value, and the more value it throws off, of course, is going to attract those who want to obtain it. That's just the nature of things. It's always been the nature. So, at least in the West. And so, I mean, maybe I'm a pessimist. I don't see the emergence of a new kind of art that is going to somehow throw the money, lenders out of the temple. I just don't see that. I think whatever comes along, and we keep, having new kinds of painting, but still painting, but we have new kinds of painting, new kinds of sculpture, and new kinds of in-between art. And it all becomes collectible, and he or she that has the money collects it. Case in point, Crystal Bridges, the Walton Museum in,
Right.
It's, I forget what town, name of the town right now eludes me. But when they started to build the museum and build the collection, she would go to auctions in New York, London, and elsewhere, and she would simply outbid everybody else. So whenever she walked in the door, people were cringing. I mean, billionaires were cringing because she could just sign a bigger check. So I think that that element, and as a result of that, she has things like Larry Rivers' Last Confederate Soldier, which is a wonderful painting. You know, she's got the cream of the crop in Benton. I think it's Bentonville, Arkansas.
Yeah,
So the money still talks, and I don't think that that a revolution is going to be created by artists that is going to overthrow that system.
well, the great experiment was the Dia Foundation, right? We saw that happen.
You mean when it was in Soho, the Soho one?
$40 million, 5 years later, nothing got done.
Yeah.
Lamont Young and Cecilia were given the Mercantile Building and $15,000 a month in the 70s.
Yeah.
And all they did was lay on the floor and hum at the ceiling.
Well, that one Walter Di Maria thing was in there for what, 20 years or something? 20 still? I don't know. Is it still there?
And Donald Judd said,
Yeah.
if I didn't think it would last forever, I would have done something.
Uh-huh.
I gave him that building, and that experiment was important because you got to read Faust, and then try to do a deal like that again. I got to see it close up because they offered the deal to Rauschenberg, and he turned him down.
Uh-huh.
He said, no, you don't just throw money at an artist. The idea was you had so much money, you didn't own any property, you didn't pay taxes on stuff. There were no bills at the end of the month, and all you did was
I'm
make art.
sorry, Terry. I think that I disagree with you. You don't just throw money at an artist. Okay. It depends on the artist. I think there are a lot of artists who would say, please throw money at me.
We need T-shirts. Throw money here.
Yeah, right.
Right. Throw money here.
Yeah, I'll go along with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chamberlain, it hurt him a lot. Being given that kind of power,
He was crushed.
10-foot aluminum balls. They spent 3 years making. No, money is not the answer.
Again, sniffing around, I'm wondering, the question is, what difference does it make to an artist how much the stuff sells for? If it limits his freedom, if it sells for more money and he doesn't get the more money or she doesn't get the more money, what the hell difference does it make? It only makes a difference if you can't make your art. Then it makes a difference. If you can't create, if you can't do what's in your guts, or whatever metaphysical zone you want to refer to, if you can't make it, then you're in trouble. And who gives a shit how much money it goes for? I mean, if it's not going for $1 million, so you won't wind up in the show at the end of the year at MoMA or whatever it is. And
I'm glad you commented about the museums, because the museums are now in a war to see who can spend the most on the installation,
right,
not the art, the installation.
that's where all the money's going.
Mass MoCo spent over $1 million on Nick Cave's installation. And I'm not so sure the piece came out better because of that.
So Guy, I completely agree with your thesis, except I would say.
You haven't seen my art.
Okay.
Sorry.
But it's what is real is that there has been a bill that has been lingering in Congress, and it gets brought up every 3 or 4 years, 5 years, that would actually allow artists to have a piece of auction prices when art is resold. It would change the nature of essentially of the copyright, or there would be a trailing edge that goes beyond the initial purchase.
Right now,
Made from them or from a gallery.
right now, you've got the Gottlieb Foundation, the Jackson Pollock, and you can name the other ones, okay? Where if you get completely desperate, all artists are completely desperate, that you can sort of, beg to, and if you're lucky, you get a year's worth of money, maybe 2 years worth of money, depending on how you live, how many children you have, and then you get to create like a Banshee, and then and that's good. And I like the idea of 2% going either for public art, or there's some kind of fund that artists could have access to. Some people would argue artists don't know what to do with money. I don't think that's really the issue, or non-artists would use the money. I don't think that's an issue either. I think what's an issue is, I'm going to say this, I hope it doesn't get repeated, I'm saying it publicly. There was a time when art supplies were acquired other than going to an art store and paying the full value of a tube of paint. Okay, I'll leave it to your imagination. Okay, I know many artists who acquired the necessary art supplies through means other than paying dollars for the materials. Okay, and I include myself among them. I've tried to make up for my misdeeds of the past. I still probably owe the Art Students League a few $100s. But in any case, there should be a way, a resource. Some of the better manufacturers actually offer that. I think Golden has a sort of a program where you can, maybe, but in any case, there should be a way that artists can get the materials they need. But what you really need is time, more than anything else. And I've been hanging out with Tery in the last couple of years, and, it's all about time, because, you've got to mature these ideas.
The Dutch made all artists tax exempt.
And the Canadians,
you
all
get
get
that?
12, you get 15 grand a year if you're an artist in Canada.
If you're an artist in Holland, you pay no taxes. So you sell and you get it all.
Right.
They found within a year that about 80% of the population was registering as artists.
Right.
And they had to rewrite the bill. And that,
By the way, Guy and Cheryl, the idea of a certain percentage for art, the DCA, Department of Cultural Affairs in New York City, is the place where percent for art, that's the name of the program, still exists. And the other example of that kind of phenomenon was, what the heck was the name of it? The group that was in Lower Manhattan that was putting art into not just public buildings. What?
Lower Manhattan Cultural Council.
No. Well, but no, there was a not-for-profit that was.
There was one called,
Huh?
There was one called Change, but they never had enough money.
OIA, Organization of Independent
Oh, yeah,
Artists.
I exhibited.
So OIA was doing this separate from the city. I mean, it was their own enterprise. And they were getting effectively a deal from the buildings in which they did this, were providing some money and space and assistance to the artists that were installing the work, et cetera. So there have been, even in New York City, even in unfeeling New York City, there are some things.
Does anybody here know about the show, the art competition show in Grand Rapids in Michigan?
No.
I've seen it. I only saw it because it was connected to you in some way. I looked it up, but I don't know much more about it.
It's, well, the prize was $500,000.
Wow.
And over 1 million people showed up for the exhibits.
Uh-huh.
They ran for, I think, 2 weeks, 1,700 artists. That's, to me, I thought that was a big deal. And the art world just sort of yawns because it's not a meaningful amount of money or anything anymore. It's bizarre, very bizarre.
Is that a festival or is it indoors?
No, it's all the storefronts, 1,700 storefronts are given to
Oh,
art
wow.
to make art. And you vote with your cell phone, which one you like the best.
Nice.
And then the winner gets
Yeah, and it
$500,000.
includes performance art on the streets. It's just all over the city.
That's
But it
great.
gives all the artists opportunity to get the.
Let's do that here.
We're
Well, we're
working on it.
looking to do it here, but it would have to take the whole valley because 1 million people is too much for any one area around here. But we certainly got the product. We got the artists and everything. And we've got people here who are knowledgeable about organizing something like that. And I think it could be extraordinary and very productive.
Well, I'm just going to say this for the record. I don't even want anybody to know about it. But in terms of finding a transcendental method, I've been I give my art away a lot. If someone likes something, I give it to them. Okay. But I also put my art out in public spaces, and it's not tied down. It's not glued down. It's not nailed down. It's not screwed in. And people, it will often stay. I have pieces in this town that have been up for close to a year, and nobody has destroyed them or taken them. I have other pieces that have been destroyed. Many pieces have been taken. And there are some cases that are full-blown paintings. I used to do it in New York City. I would have a 4-by-9-foot painting, and I would staple it onto a construction site, and would stay up there for 2 or 3 months. And then sometimes they would disappear. And so, no one was keeping track of them. I didn't go out and keep track. But it was fun, though, is just to get the art out there where people could see it, react or not react. One day I went with my uncle and walked down the street, and we walked right by one of my largest paintings, and he didn't even see it. I mean, it was red, and he didn't even see it. The thing is, it was fun just putting the art out there, just so it would be there. And it had nothing to do with monetary anything. And I still want to experiment a lot more with that. I plan on doing a lot more of that. But to do that, you have to be willing and able. And
Let me make
ahead.
an announcement. One thing,
okay,
I'm putting together a group to stop the ban on art in Greenwich Village. People don't know it, but there's a ban on art in Greenwich Village,
are you kidding?
public or private. You cannot have it seen from the street. Greenwich Village is the only place in New York City that has no art.
I thought that's where the intelligentsia was.
We spent 2 years in court, and Valerie had accumulated almost $1 million in fines. There was a warrant out for her arrest because she was the point foundation that was sponsoring her. The NISCA had approved it, Landmarks had approved it, everything was set to go. And the community board said, no, we don't allow any art and we won't discuss it. If we start that, it'll end up like Paris.
Oh, God forbid.
They said that.
Yeah, I worked with an artist named Ralston Farina, aka Steve Raven, and he's the one who turned me on to the idea. He would go and do his artwork, which was time art, and then he would take it to in those days it was called a Xerox machine, and he would make copies of it, and he'd take a roll of tape from the dime store, and he'd go and he'd tack up these 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. He would sign them, and he'd put them all over Soho and downtown, and people would take them. And at the time I was at Princeton, I said, "Are you crazy? What are you doing that for?" He says, "It's perfect because everybody's collecting my art." And I thought he was crazy at the time. And now that I think about it, I think he was right on target. He just completely circumscribed the system. Now, if you want to have some fun, go try to find Ralston Farina or Steve Raven on the internet. He does not exist.
Uh-huh.
I spent about, and everybody knew him. Okay. Everybody knew him because he was any performance art that was going on in Soho in the 70s, he was there. He was part of the show, whether it was the kitchen or wherever, he was there. And his idea was, he didn't want to have to make art. He didn't want to make physical pieces to go into the art market. He just Xeroxed his events, taped them to the wall outside, and people would collect his things. And at the time I thought he was crazy. Now I think he was kind of a visionary.
All right, Guy, hot off the presses, artforum.com.
Yeah.
Ralston Farina, the art of Ralston Farina now reemerges as one of the roughly 24 artists embraced by the Whitney upcoming show, Rituals of Rented Island, something. Anyway,
So they've resurrected Ralston.
He's resurrected.
Well, that's good. It's going to be interesting.
From your lips to God's ear.
Well, I'm glad he's listening or she's listening.
Okay.
I think we got a new God. And that's under Art Forum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Artforum.com.
Anyhow, it's what's encouraging is that there is another modality. Okay, it doesn't have to be just art for money, because I think that's all fucked up, to put it in English.
Well, it isn't fucked up if you like sipping your sherry in the audience of Sotheby's. It's perfect. Everything, the world is in perfect order.
Yeah, but the,
It's
but
just
the
that,
kind of,
as I said in the beginning, it's just that these are all parallel universes that don't exactly,
Align.
connect. They don't align.
right.
Right.
Okay, but the kind of art that gets made, okay, that's, you see, I think that's what the subject matter is underneath the money issue, is what kind of art gets made. If
Yeah.
the kind of art gets made is only the kind of art that sells, then we're in trouble.
What do you think the
There's a
yeah,
beautiful,
commercial was?
yeah, there's a beautiful way that gets prevented, which is that most artists are making art that doesn't sell.
Right.
So that's the
But
protection.
they're making it as though, oh, this would sell, or someone would like this, or this would be acceptable
Mhm.
for somebody. So they're inventing this audience in their mind, which probably doesn't exist. And Cindy, you probably agree with me, right? Half the time we have this audience, this imaginary audience in our head, which we call the art world, or somebody in a museum or a gallery that probably doesn't even exist. So we have this imaginary audience, and we're trying to cater to this audience because that's where the value is. And it's not about self-esteem so much as it's about the monetary value. And I like money just as much as anybody, but it's not a great way to make art. You put art on top of the altar, you put money on top of the altar, and you start painting to that god.
Oh, that feeds right into my my favorite quote.
Okay.
And it's a bad artist follows his audience, catering to whatever they want. A good artist will always lead. Now you'll never believe who said that. It was Zach. It was Zach Galifianakis,
Oh, really?
but he said it about with a comic, and I just changed it to an artist. So you're saying that they're creating for this audience that doesn't exist. The heck with the audience. I mean, if you've spent your whole life doing your art, you should be doing art that's you have to do, that speaks to you, that you can't live without doing. So, I mean, to be very honest, I rarely think about my audience.
That's because I'm sure you've come to the same conclusion. There's always somebody out there for whatever it is that's being done,
Mhm.
and you can create your own little world with that. And art, and that's okay. Even a bad work of art is better than a brass stork, right?
It's better than a brass what?
Stork.
Something you pick up in Walmart. Yeah.
Cheryl, what do you think about the programs like in San Francisco and
I'm sorry, I missed. What do I think about?
What program?
these pilot programs that are giving artists in cities like San Francisco and I think St. Paul a steady income to allow them to focus on their art and survive financially?
Wow.
Let's move.
It won't do the trick.
Well-
You've got to face the world, and if you're getting enough money to hide from the world, it's going to hurt the art, and you don't know what's going to happen to you and what you're going to think. And I like to say, don't fuck with the artist. Leave them alone. Let them go through it. You can clear the way. You can help make paths easier to follow. But I think most of the artists that anybody involved with this organization, ATOA, they're looking for things on the fringe, people that are having a difficult time, because that's where you're breaking the ice and making things happen. No.
A couple of quotes. Strive not to be a success, but rather to be of value. That's Einstein. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. That's Oscar Wilde.
I like that one.
Yeah, that's
And
You and the gallery's website, the first quote is from Seawright, who wrote for Motor Trend magazine. And he's talking about cars, but it works for art.
Yeah.
He said that censorship and conservative thinking leads to the destruction of creativity. And he meant, and making an automobile that was worthy to be different and something, but it still works.
Yeah, but it takes a lot of guts. If you're an artist, it takes a lot of guts to be an artist, face your family, face your friends, and say, well, shit, I haven't sold a fucking thing. And yeah, I really love you a lot. And I hope you don't mind that we don't have any money this month, this year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And anybody in this group or any other group knows what that's like. And it's, you know, that's really, it's pretty shitty when you have your only consolation is how great you think your art is. Boy, talk about a distorting influence. When you have to be the one who's patting yourself on the back, that's really rough.
What's the joke? So how'd your show go? How was it? Was it a big success? Well, I liked it.
I always tell myself I'm the greatest painter alive today, and that solves my problems. And I can usually get away with that for about, up to 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. And I even use it in conversation. Like, who are you? I'm the greatest living painter ever, especially now. And,
the record is still held by Rembrandt.
I agree.
He had the most commissions and made the most money of any artist that's existed.
And died completely broke.
Yeah.
As did Columbus.
But you want to hear that, right? Your accountant whispers in your ear, you're $1 overdrawn, and a week late, as you're dying.
Yep.
No, mucking with the money is not the path to success for an artist. Clearing obstacles like a community. The chief of the 10th precinct, we knew him because we were volunteer auxiliary police, and he was a buddy. And in the middle of all that, he takes us into his office and he puts his hat down on the desk in front of us, and he says, "These people don't want you here," being in the Greenwich Village district. They don't because you're raising dust where they've been trying to keep it quiet forever. There's 2 figures on a bench, and the next block up, I can't remember the name. That's on permanent loan. It's not
Right.
there as a work of art. Our case went to the Supreme Court, for God's sakes, to be argued. And finally, the city gave up, but they didn't admit they were wrong. And the law still exists.
Well, the only shit I get is from real estate people, because when they see my stuff out there, in their minds, it's garbage. Okay, obviously this person also owns a gallery in town, but when they see my art up on the walls or sitting on the street or attached to some bench or wall or whatever, they get very, very upset. I went and painted old broken down concrete along the river. Okay, the Hudson River, you can only see it if you're in the water. Okay, you can't find it normally walking down the railroad tracks. You have to be in the water looking at the shore to see that I painted these old concrete structures, blue and green and orange and all these crazy colors. They found me. No way that anybody could know it was me. They found me and warned me that I could be arrested for using the colors green and red on a waterway, because green and red were reserved for navigational purposes on the waterway.
Uh-huh.
And as though some boat is going to crash because he sees a green concrete pillar on the side of the river. So I went and painted everything. I had to figure out what could I use besides green and red. It took me a little while to figure out. Purple was was not good enough. Blue works pretty well. Yellow looks pretty good, but frankly, green and red are really do their job as colors, especially against nature and against the river, which is, I guess, why they're used there. So basically, if you're an artist, you can't use green and red near the river. Okay.
What about red and white? They're going to think you're Japanese.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think that, there's a lot of silliness, but I'm very encouraged that Ralston Farina has surfaced through 50 years of time. He's the one, by the way, he told me, get the hell out of Princeton. Richard Serra said that to me also. And I met him in Stanford, and he dragged me into Xerox PARC, which the very first digital computer painting system was. And he dragged me in there, this crazy guy. He bought a Princeton shirt so that he could get around the campus without being arrested or thrown off the campus. He bought a Princeton shirt, and here's this guy from the South Bronx or South Philly, and couldn't speak very clearly, but knew his ideas really well. And he's the one dragging me in at 3 o'clock in the morning in Xerox PARC to see the new technology, which obviously has changed the world in 1972 or 3.
We were at that opening in Rochester. It's their headquarters.
Well, this was out in Silicon Valley.
No, this was before Silicon Valley was invented. Xerox was in Rochester.
Yeah, but the mouse and all that stuff is, all done in the hills of Silicon. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. The idea is that we need people who are artists. In the old days, they would call them things like shaman. And you'd go see a shaman, he'd give you some beads, he'd scratch some things, whatever. But there was a connection going on. I don't want to go back to some sort of prehistoric notion of art. I mean, I like modern art too, but it's just weird. The money aspect is a very distorting filter.
All right, so it's almost 8 o'clock, so I'd like to wrap this up. But before we do that, I just want to make an announcement. So we're doing these talks every month, the last Thursday of each month. And Tery, our next topic, I believe, is why'd you make it? Is that right?
Yeah, why'd you make it?
And also Danielle.
Not a career, your object, right?
I thought that was Jamaica.
Yeah.
And also Danielle, who's our guest panelist, she didn't get a chance to introduce herself, so I'd like to give her a couple of minutes to do that.
And can you tell us what your name is?
Oh, my name is Lisa Yort, and I
Oh,
work.
you're Lisa. Okay.
I'm, even though it says, I see that it says.
Yeah, it says Tery. I know you weren't Tery.
Well, you can call me Tery. That's fine. Yeah, I'm the director at the gallery, and I work with Tery.
The Women's Inner Art Center had me donate paintings to a benefit for their organization years ago, and assumed I was a married woman, a divorced woman, because I had a hyphenated name and Tery with one R. And at the auction of the art, the auctioneer says, we did very well tonight. Would Tery come up and take a bow, because she got the most money raised for the organization. And Kate Millay and Judy Chicago and all those women went nuts trying to put their cigars out on me.
All right, Danielle, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you. This has been really lovely, everyone. Thanks for including me in this. My name is Danielle. I live in Southern Vermont. I'm also an artist. I do work with sheepskins and wool roving and block printing and historical costuming and like a whole slew of hobbies that I can't list here. I'm also a preschool teacher. That's my job that brings in the big bucks, quote unquote. Yeah, this was really lovely. Thank you for having me.
The Rolls Royce Wraith, the new giant, super expensive Rolls Royce, has lamb's wool mats for your feet in the car.
That's
Yeah, I get the new model every single year. It's
Yeah, it's bizarre.
with
Yeah.
your teacher's salary.
yeah.
Lamb's wool between your toes is so nice.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for participating. This was wonderful, and I hope you can all join us again.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I think it's great to get these issues out in the public air so people can think about them in a different way.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing to Tery. So when I came here from Michigan and I went to the Fulton Gallery, it changed my life. That's when I started working on metals. And then I totally left paint and I only used chemistry. But it started with the Fulcrum Gallery. And I don't know if I've ever told you that, but I wanted you to know what an influence that gallery had on my work.
Well, then all our sacrifice worked out.
Good.
Yeah, that's terrific. Robert Dugonier is one of the artists, and I think you might have seen, he builds, blows glass shells for hermit crabs to live in. They're artificially made by him, but his specialty is putting copper in glass, molten glass. And he does a lot of work with that. And he's one of the few artists I know of on this planet that will share any information to help technical stuff. The nuts and bolts stuff, like where do I get to buy this and where can I go for that? And so he got me onto a company and the state next to Vermont.
New Hampshire.
Yeah, there's a company there that grows crystals from metals that are perfectly pure. They're used for laboratory, but they're incredible. They got a lot of art in them. And
How do you spell his last name?
Dugonier, D-U-R.
D-U space G-R-E.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you do that again?
D-U, capital S space, capital G-R-E-N-I-E-R.
Thank you.
Yeah, his glass factories are just near Bennington.
He's on exhibit now at the Brattleboro Museum.
Oh, really?
I believe that's still, Danielle, you might know.
No, I haven't been there since the pre-COVID times.
Okay, well, thank you again. And this session has been recorded. So if anybody wants a copy of that recording, you can just reach out to me at shakespearesfulcrum@gmail.com and I'll send it over to you.
Thank you.
And have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.